Good evening, everyone. My name is Beth Dunphy, a Deputy Executive Director here at Goddard Riverside. I'm delighted to welcome you to this very timely discussion between Darleny Suriel, a CUNY student in our options program, and Arva Rice, President and CEO of the New York Urban League. This is the second in a great series of conversations from our Social Justice Never Sleeps Gala. Last week, we heard from Jeffrey Toobin of The New Yorker and CNN, and in a couple weeks, we'll hear from Dr. Erwin Redlener, Director of the Pandemic Resource and Response Initiative at Columbia. Next week, October 15th, Goddard's Executive Director, Rod Jones, will chat with Manhattan Borough President, Gail Brewer. This will all culminate with our virtual gala on October 29th. I hope you can join us. At the gala, we'll be announcing the winners of our social justice book prizes for youth and adults. We just announced our shortlist last week, 10 great reads covering a wide range of issues that are worth a look. Details for all the conversations, our gala, and the book prizes are available on our website or by clicking the banner above my head. I'd also like to shout out some of our sponsors for the gala and this speaker series. Two of our biggest are Penguin Random House and Workman Publishing. These two houses also support our community in a variety of ways throughout the year, from volunteering to toy drives. We're so grateful for their ongoing partnership with Goddard Riverside. Before we bring Darleny and Arva on stage, I've got a few housekeeping announcements to share. We can't see or hear the audience tonight, so you don't have to worry about accidentally turning on your mic or camera, but we hope you'll engage in a conversation in the chat. Please type any questions in the chat box. We'll have a Q&A with audience questions at the end, but you can enter them throughout the presentation. Keep in mind there's a slight delay, about 30 seconds in the video. And if you're joining us a few minutes late, the event will start from the beginning, so you won't miss a thing. If you have any technical difficulties, there's also a support tab where we can help you troubleshoot. You can also adjust the sizing of your chat section or the video by dragging the gray edges of each section. And if you hover your mouse, controls will pop up, allowing you to make the video full screen, pause the action, adjust the volume, and pin a small video to the corner of your screen. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Darleny Suriel and Arva Rice. Darleny is a student in our options program. Born in the Dominican Republic, she immigrated to the US at the age of 4 and has lived in the Bronx ever since. She's a student in our Options Center, which helps New Yorkers get into and complete college. Studying political science at CUNY, Darleny is also a policy assistant with Degrees NYC. Degrees is a collective impact project fighting for equity in college access and completion. Arva Rice is a passionate community leader who's dedicated herself to creating pathways to success for young people with a focus on girls and women. She currently serves as president and CEO of the New York Urban League. She's a member of the Women's Forum, Greater New York chapter of the Links Incorporated, a commissioner for the New York City Equal Employment Practices Commission, and a trustee of First Corinthians Baptist Church. Arva was also an Annie Casey Fellow, which is a national fellowship for government and nonprofit leaders focused on supporting innovative solutions for children. She previously served as a program director for economic literacy for Girls Incorporated, executive director at Public Allies New York, and also executive director of Project Enterprise, where I had the privilege of working with her. Arva graduated from Northwestern University and lives in Harlem. Please join me in welcoming Darleny and Arva.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's a privilege to be here, especially with you, Arva. As Beth said, Arva is the president and CEO of the New York Urban League. And Arva, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the New York Urban League and what you guys do?
Sure. First of all, Darlene, it's wonderful to have this conversation with you. And thank you so much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to our chat today. As you know, I am a big fan of wonderful, strong women, and you certainly fit that mold. So I look forward to what you're going to do and be going into the future. I have the privilege of serving as the president and CEO of the New York Urban League, a 100-year-old civil rights organization. And I am the second woman to have this post in its 100-year history. But I can't tell the story of the New York Urban League without telling a little bit of the story of how I came into the work of social justice. And the story really starts with my parents. And so my parents were sharecroppers in Arkansas. And so they actually picked cotton and decided that they wanted to have a better life for their children. And so they decided that they were going to move north. And for people who were in Arkansas, north meant moving to either Chicago or to Milwaukee. And so my father first went to Chicago, and when he got there, he found out that the job that he was promised had been given away. So he went to the next big city, which was Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and my mom followed him shortly after that. They just made that move because they were looking for a better place for their children, but they didn't realize that they were part of a whole wave of millions of Black people who moved from the South to the North called the Great Migration. And so they were part of that Great Migration story. So it's not surprising that I would end up running an organization that was started over 100 years ago, that was dedicated to individuals like my parents who were moving from the South to the North and trying to find places to send their kids to school, trying to find jobs, trying to find community, and came to places called urban leagues. And the urban leagues were started in order to serve those individuals who were making that great migration, and started in New York, and then they moved to other cities around the country. And now there's 90 urban leagues around the country today.
Yeah, that's incredible. The work you're doing is already incredible, but to hear that backstory and how your own family history connects to that work and even in a way inspires that work is really motivating, even for somebody like me. I can definitely relate to the family aspect of your story because, as Bev said and as we spoke about earlier, I'm an immigrant. I'm a child of immigrants. So I remember seeing my parents, struggle from assimilating from DR to the US and finding a job, and my mother struggling to find a job and to really find resources for her because she didn't speak English. And that inspired a lot of my advocacy as well. So I definitely relate to you on that level. And I'd love to hear more about the Urban League. How do the local chapters and national headquarters work together?
So the national organization was started 110 years ago. So it started 10 years before the New York Urban League, and basically was dedicated, as I mentioned, to working with individuals who were moving from the South to the North. And so about 10 years into the work, they said that this place called New York needed its own attention. And so they decided to start the New York Urban League. So that was one of my biggest surprises when I came to the I got there and I was thinking at the time when they were celebrating the 90th anniversary. So I was like, oh my goodness, we're going to be the first urban league to celebrate our 90th anniversary, because we had to have been the first one because we're here in, big bad New York City. And to find out that there were other urban leagues that had started during that 10 years. And so the Milwaukee Urban League, the St. Louis Urban League, the Chicago Urban League are all older than us, but they still are dedicated. Our overall goal for the organization is to empower communities and change lives. And we do that working in education, employment, housing, and healthcare primarily around the country. And the New York Urban League focuses in on education, employment, and advocacy. So that's the work that I do, getting young people to and through college, helping individuals to find employment. We work with young professionals, helping them to find community. A lot of them move from other places and move to New York and are trying to find that. And then a lot of work in advocacy, because as we know, this is the time and the moment for a renewal and resurgence of social justice. And so that's kind of the work that I do every day and the work of the Urban League.
Yeah, that's great to hear, especially the fact that you guys work in education and employment, advocacy, all areas that I think interconnect with each other, because a lot of students first experience or learn about advocacy is in college or is, later on in their educational journey. And a lot of students look for employment that has to do with their own passion, their own version of advocacy. So that's great to hear. And I'm interested to know, what do you think are the most pressing issues that the Urban League is working on today? And do you feel like that's changed, or has it not changed since the Urban League started?
The Urban League's logo is an apple with an equal sign on the inside. So that means that represents equality for all New Yorkers. And that's the work that we've been working on for over 100 years. And so equality for all New Yorkers 100 years ago certainly manifests itself in a little bit different ways than it does now. But we still work helping people to find jobs, helping them to get education, and to advocate when we see that there's differences and challenges there. The Urban League almost, I would say maybe 90 years ago, commissioned a study that they were going to say, what are the conditions of life for African Americans? And so they found out that African Americans at that time, were suffering from bronchial and issues with respiratory. And that right now it's, issues around asthma, but at that time they were talking about respiratory issues. And so they created their own summer camp, because Black kids weren't allowed to go to the summer camps of other kids, and they weren't allowed to really leave the city. So the Urban League operated summer camps for a couple of decades. And so now we don't have a summer camp because Black kids can go to other camps, but we still are meeting those needs. And so we continue to meet the needs even as they evolve. They may look a little bit different from decade to decade. They may look a little different from generation. We may tweet about them. We may post about them now, which we didn't do back then, but the issues, unfortunately, are still the same.
Yeah, 100%. I can agree with you on the fact that some of these issues still exist to this day, because you said that the Urban League commissioned this survey 90 years ago, like a while ago. Mm-hmm. But even today, in a borough like the Bronx, which is where I'm from, which is predominantly Black and Hispanic families, we have like one of the biggest asthma rates in the country. And a lot of people don't realize that environmental justice also has a lot to do with equity, especially racial and economic equity. So thank you for bringing that up. And, the fight for racial and social justice, it's one that's long. It's one that's, it can be draining even sometimes. And it's tempting to feel like something's different, especially when you hear so many people saying, like, I've never seen a movement like this before. But from your experience at the Urban League, what do you think is similar or different between the Black Lives Matter movement and maybe past efforts before the Black Lives Matter movement? Or how do they connect?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the Black Lives Matter movement is the evolution of, say Black power, right? Which is the evolution of Ain't I a Man, which is the evolution of some of the original civil rights work. And so I think that it's important for every generation has to fight for freedom. And so this is this generation's fight. And like I said, it looks different. We're tweeting about it. We're going on Instagram about it. We're using different mediums than we have in the past. And sometimes we're not. People are still in the streets. They're still marching. So it's a combination of developing it's your own voice in your own way to say and to have that protest. But I think that some of the tensions that sometimes come up between an older and a younger movement are natural. And they're something that have happened from generation to generation. I'm sure that you've heard of John Lewis, who just recently passed away. And John Lewis and Martin Luther King were wonderful, wonderful partners. And for John Lewis, Martin Luther King was somebody that he incredibly admired and respected. But there were times when the youth movement, as it was called, did bump heads with the older civil rights movement. And we look at it right now and say the freedom rides were amazing, and they were. The freedom rides were incredible, and they changed and pushed the civil rights movement in ways that could not have happened if it had been for that. But the young people getting on buses and risking their lives was not probably the best thing for the older people. They would not have suggested that their college students, their college age kids, to get on buses and to risk their lives in that way. But the college kids wanted to do that. They felt like that was their duty. They felt like that was their way to contribute. There was some tension that was there, but because of that, it moved that movement in a way that would not have happened if it had not been for the youth. And so I think that young people always have a role in civil rights movements, that they always push the envelope, and that is their role, because they don't have as many responsibilities. They don't have as many people saying to them no. They believe in what's next for them, and it's wonderful. It's the energy. It's what drives us, and we can't have any movement for change. There has never been any movement for change without the work and energy of young people. So this moment may feel different because there's young people that are involved, but there's things that are similar to every other movement that we've ever had. Like I said, the mode and the means of it are different. I think that for this particular moment in time, as we think about George Floyd and how literally the world watched that 8 minutes and 46 seconds when the police officer had his knee on his neck, was because so many of us had been moved home because of COVID. Even if you were an essential worker, when your shift was over, you couldn't hang out with your family, you couldn't go to your church, you couldn't go to your mosque, you couldn't go to your synagogue, you were basically sent home. And so more people saw that moment than probably ever would have happened before. And because of that, I think it makes this moment different. It's more of a shared experience. And it was something that could not be argued because the camera was there, right? And so that camera, that means, is different, right? Even though it was very important during the civil rights movement, they knew the importance of media. But for that camera to focus in that moment, I think that that's part of what made that a little bit different.
Yeah, I completely agree with absolutely everything you said. And I think it's interesting that you bring up how young people and older people can sometimes clash, even though the vision and the goal is a lot of times it's the same thing. And I think for me, just speaking as a young person, I didn't realize how much we took for granted until this summer. Like, you know, I feel like revolution has always been glamorized, and like how you said, the freedom riders and the civil rights movement. You think like, wow, they're so courageous. But it wasn't until this summer and joining the protests and having to see videos like the George Floyd video or just reading about Breonna Taylor that you realize the kind of toll it takes on your mental health, how going to protests you go, but you don't even know if you're going to come back safely, especially when you were seeing police beating protesters and tear gassing them and even shooting them with rubber bullets and taking like half their eyes out. And you didn't realize like, oh, this was dangerous. This was never glamorous. This was never fun. This is like life or death. So I definitely agree with you. And I think what's interesting now is, you know, the intersectionality of it all, right? Because when we say Black Lives Matter now, it's not just, cis Black men or cis Black women. It's, you know, Black trans lives matter, Black LGBT lives matter, Black immigrant lives matter. So I think it's definitely evolved as a movement, the more you get more voices into it. So I'm seeing some questions from the chat, so let me just acknowledge them real quick. How have the people of the Urban League, how has the pandemic affected the work that you guys do?
I'm going to answer that question, but I just wanted to go back a little bit to what you were saying about recognizing and realizing the risk of being involved in a movement, right? So you recognize and realize that in real time, and obviously that was very real. When you think about the civil rights movement, you have to remember that people who went to that march on Washington, it took them days to get there, and there was no such thing as vacation days, right? So there was that question of whether when they got back home, would their, you know, whatever, whether it was a house or whether it was a shack that they lived in, would it have been burned down? What would happen to their families? So people took real risk to be involved in that movement. And so we're in a moment in time right now when we ask the question. I know growing up, I always ask my mom, you know, would I have marched? Like, would I have marched during the civil rights movement? Well, whatever we're doing right now is what we would have done then. So whatever we're doing right now is our answer to what would we do when we have an opportunity, when we have a moment, when it's our time. So I just wanted to speak on that first. You asked me about how the urban leagues, the people that we serve, were impacted by the pandemic. And I think that we as New Yorkers were impacted in a lot of the same ways as others. What was exacerbated for the community that I live in, and certainly the community that you live in, is that we had underlying health conditions, right? So we have people with diabetes, other underlying health issues that made it really a challenge for us during the pandemic. A second thing that made it a challenge for us is we often live in more crowded conditions. So we're in an apartment and auntie lives with us, grandma may live with us, you know, we may have an older brother. So we were in more congested living conditions as well. We made up the majority of essential workers. So as I mentioned, we may have come home and not gone to church or not gone to, a family celebration, but we still were at home, and still part of that is when we were out, we were part of the essential workers and interacting with people and making it more challenging for us. We also work more in the healthcare industry. So doctors and nurses, but also all the people that make those offices, make those hospitals run. And so as a result of that, you saw that the numbers of deaths for African Americans and Latinos were much higher than for other people. So specifically with my staff, I found in the beginning, we were trying to figure out how to provide support to young people who are no longer in school and making sure that people had tablets, trying to figure out, okay, we don't run a food pantry, but how do we connect people who can get them resources for food? We opened a COVID family fund so that individuals that needed help paying for different bills. So those were all the things that we did. And then suddenly I look up and I'm in a staff meeting and people are, we're looking around on the Zoom because we're all on a Zoom call, and people look sad. And why are they sad? Because, grandma died, or they're sad because, big mama passed away. And so the deaths that were on the television and were reported were the deaths that we personally experienced because we are Black and brown. And so the COVID pandemic affected us health-wise, impacted us in terms of the number of deaths and people that we knew that were sick and who died and passed away. We weren't able to hold them in the ways that we're used to. We weren't able to have our closing family rituals with them. So in a lot of ways, I feel like our communities are still hurting and we're still depressed at this time. But I know that, we'll come back and we'll come through because we always do.
Yeah, no, I definitely can relate to everything you said. And I think it's important to hold on to that little glimpse of hope because, it has been a tough time. But I think the silver linings in this pandemic has been that a lot of the inequities that have always existed were being highlighted. We're finally being acknowledged. Like you talked about the digital gap. You talked about the fact that the majority of Black and brown people were essential workers and they weren't getting any kind of, or if they were getting any kind of financial compensation, it was temporary. It wasn't like, wow, we didn't realize that you hold this country together. Or the fact that a lot of people were like, New York is so over, like we're going upstate or we're going here. Like they were leaving New York. And that wasn't a choice for a lot of Black and brown families that were living in these like huddled communities. So then we had that weird time where all these apartments are empty and all these people are moving out for good, but the homeless rates are still going up and people were still, fearing eviction. So I think it definitely highlighted a lot of inequities. And you also talked about, not only physical health, but the mental health, like how everybody was depressed, everybody was sad. And again, the silver lining, especially comparing it to what we were talking about earlier, is that, we have resources for our mental health that didn't exist during the civil rights movement. And were especially helpful when like a pandemic plus a historical revolution kind of came together like it did this summer. But it also like highlighted what was missing, what still needed to be worked on, what kind of resources still needed to be available or accessible to a lot of the people in our community. So thank you for talking about that because not a lot of people did or do still.
Yeah, and thank you for the ways in which you've clearly, thoughtfully analyzed and are thinking through these issues. It's incredible and amazing. Like I said, you're an amazing young woman. You really are.
I feel like, I don't know, like this is a very important moment to me because I think I'm learning so much from, connecting the past to the present and like how it's going to shape our future. And I am a big believer of you have to look at the positive. Sometimes it looks like things haven't changed, but they have. Compared to like the times of John Lewis and when he was my age, like, the youth that exists today. And speaking of the Black Lives Matter movement, just going back to it for a second, I did notice that this time, because the Black Lives Matter movement it's been happening since I think Trayvon Martin happened. And I was still like a freshman in high school when that happened. And now I'm in college. So, but I did realize that this summer there was more diversity in terms of who was supporting this movement, who was contributing, who were in the streets protesting. And I did realize that I did notice that there was more white people kind of, finally acknowledging like, you know what, which is ridiculous to even say, but Black lives, maybe they do matter, which was ridiculous, but it was like, okay, it's about time they realize. Why do you think that white people in particular have been so reluctant to recognize that Black people, that Black lives do matter and that police brutality is killing African Americans, especially when it comes to like the Breonna Taylor case? Why is it that people look for reasons to criminalize her instead of just accepting that that was just a human rights violation?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think that as I kind of alluded to before, because of COVID, you had so many people looking at a case that was just so undeniable all at the same time, and looking for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And so, for whatever reason, there's times where we talk about our personal experience. We'll talk about a microaggression that happens. We'll talk about a slight that happened with a teacher. We'll talk about something that's even more overt. And it's easy for people to compartmentalize it and say, well, Arva, I understand, but that was, one bad teacher that you had. Or, Arva, I understand that that's what happened with your brother-in-law, but that was one bad cop, right? But it's not the full totality of the system. And the fact is that this moment in time really opened up the fact that there is systemic racism. And that racism, and by that term, what we mean is that there is systems that are in place that are designed and built on the fact that one race is inherently inferior to another. That is what we mean by a system that is built to both to hold that up and to continue to have that perpetuate from generation to generation. And so an individual can say to themselves that they are not a racist, but they have to recognize that there are systems that are in place that are designed to keep that cycle going and continuing. And this moment in time created an opportunity for people to have to look that plainly in the mirror and realize that that is true. Now, I think that there's something that's different between racism and privilege. And this has also opened up a conversation about that. And it's something that I have been able to talk about a lot. As you can imagine, after this happened, the New York Urban League has worked in coalition with different groups for decades. So we started to get a lot more calls from individuals who are saying, we hear that the Urban League works with Black people. So let's see if we can work together and figure out some ways to join hands and have this conversation. Or particularly in one conversation that I was having with a professional sports team that resides in your borough. And we were talking about just the notion of what is the state of Black New York. We produced this report that's going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks that talks about how Black folks are doing in education, employment, housing, healthcare, in a couple of core key areas. And I said, as I approach this work, I want you all to know that I also know that I am privileged as well. I was born in America. I was born to two parents. I was born to two parents who never divorced. And so because of those things, I was educated and I have a college degree. Those things also make me privileged in some ways, but I'm also a Black woman in America. So it is true that you can be both privileged and you can also have some oppressions. And so, but somehow in our conversations, we want to believe that one knocks out the other. And so that we don't have to deal with both things at the same time. And I think that this moment in time really gave people an opportunity to say, you know what, I'm privileged. And as a result of that, I feel like I can make a judgment on whether racism exists or not. And the fact is that it does. And systematic racism particularly exists.
Yeah, 100%. I think at this point, it's undeniable. And I'm really glad you brought that conversation of privilege into it, because I think on both sides, a lot of people hit you like, well, you have a great job, so does racism really affect you? And like you said, it's really a balance of both. And sometimes even with yourself, you have to come to terms with like, what does it mean to be privileged? Especially when you look at like the Black Lives Matter movement in a global scale, right? When you look at it, like, what does the Black Lives Matter movement mean to like Black immigrants in detention centers, like the Honduran population, the Haitian population, that sometimes don't get amplified in American media, or even from my own experiences in the Hispanic media. So what are your thoughts on that? And how do you think allyship plays a role in kind of amplifying these stories, but making sure that we're supporting each other in our, what may be different struggles, but all come from the same root of oppression?
Mm-hmm. And you nailed it on the head when you talked about allyship, and that's exactly what this is about. I think it's important. I work with a particular project at the New York Urban League where we're able to give grants to small nonprofit organizations. And I work on this grant in conjunction with the Hispanic Federation and the Asian American Federation and the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families. And it has been remarkable for me to work with these other organizations because of their own journey as immigrants and how they have built on the civil rights movement, have built on the work of African Americans who've clearly been in this country for longer, and have learned from that. But we also work together such that if there is an issue that happens within the African American community, I get a call from my sister from Asian American Federation who says, Arva, the Asian American community stands with you. Do you want us to issue a joint statement? Are we going to do a press conference? I just want you to know that we are here for you. The same thing was the case with particularly when there was the in Puerto Rico where they had when they had the earthquake and I'm sorry, not the earthquake, when they had the I'm missing the word, but the hurricane, thank you, that happened in Puerto Rico. So we reached out and worked in conjunction with the Hispanic Federation around that, and then also with all the issues that were happening with people literally being caged at the borders. And so I'm proud of the work that we do in Coalition, but I always feel like that there's more work to be done. And particularly when we talked about this a little bit backstage, I mean, there's Africans that are also part of our immigrant experience, and so because they weren't part of the civil rights experience, sometimes there's this sense of other. So it's African American over here and it's African over there. But the fact is that we do have some shared issues and some things that we can work together and work in partnership. And it is about working as allies. And I think that there's so much more that we can do in that space.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think education plays a big role, especially when they're in allyship, because sometimes communities are more receptive to information and to learning more about different experiences when the information is coming from a group of people that they can relate to and they can understand. And I think that, you know, when we talk about privileges, one privilege that I feel like in a way the African American community in the United States has had versus other Black communities, maybe globally, or only speaking from like my country, for example, is, you know, there was a Black power movement, there was a civil rights movement, something that still hasn't existed in other countries. So they haven't understood what it meant to be Black, what it means to be Black, or what it means to discover your Black history the way that I think America and African Americans in particular has had to face with and kind of educate themselves with. So I do think that that's a good opportunity to kind of not only support each other, but also educate each other on the different experiences.
No, absolutely. I completely agree with that. I remember going to see the movie Selma with a friend of mine who was Jamaican. And so I'm sitting there watching the story and I'm seeing all the things that are happening and I'm remembering the stories that my mother told me. And so that's the lens in which I'm watching the story. And then now at the time still being the head of the Urban League, well, he's, like I said, he was from Jamaica. So for him, it was literally all news for him. Because you have to remember that, and you know, as you know, in our textbooks, in our stories that are written, we go from slavery to suddenly Martin Luther King Day. So all those pages in between are kind of stuck together, and you don't hear about Jim Crow. You don't hear about its impact on you don't hear about the Reconstruction period. You don't hear about the lynchings that led to the creation of places like the NAACP and the Urban League. You don't hear about the Great Migration. And so he's sitting there and watching this story, and for him it was all news. And so I think that that's something that we need to be sensitive about when we come together as allies to be open to each other's experiences and to create spaces for people to tell their stories.
I totally agree. And going back to what you said earlier about how sometimes people forget a little bit about their privilege, I think it's also about there's a privilege coming as an immigrant that you don't see police the same way that maybe African Americans do, because maybe your community doesn't have that same history with policing. So you kind of feel like, no, like you said, it's just one bad cop. It's not really, you know, it's all in your head. And you kind of have to like educate each other on that. And another question that I have for you is, how do you think that police and community relationships can improve, or do you think they ever could improve, and what needs to be done to gain that kind of trust, especially in a time where like the defund the police movement is so prevalent and being talked about so much?
Yeah, no, that is a great question, and it's one I'm going to be grappling with a little bit more in an official role coming up. But I think that that working with the police is going to be the issue that we need to really grapple with over the course of the next few years. I recently had an opportunity to speak directly with Commissioner Shea, and he talked about how he wants to have a safer city with the lightest touches possible. And one of the challenges of that statement is that safety looks different for a woman of my age in Harlem versus, a woman of my age in, Westchester or, someplace on Long Island. And so there's the individuals who see a police officer and they breathe a sigh of relief and say, oh my goodness, the police is here, all is going to be well. And then there's this person who's the, exact same age, exact same resources, who's in fear when they see a police officer because they have no idea what's going to happen next, right? And so do the police represent something that makes you safe, or is it the police something that are the police people that need to be feared? And I think that oftentimes the difference in the conversation is that the police often thinks that there's some education that needs to be done. And that certainly is the case. As we all know, most of us have gone to kindergarten, so we all feel like we have some experience of what schools are like and how we can make schools better. But most people have not been police officers, and so the police thinks that this is an education problem. That if people just know that there's just a few bad apples, then they'll have a sense of more of appreciation for the police and being able to move from that space. Well, there is certainly something to be said for that. But the fact is that if we had restaurants with just a few people who, few chefs who killed their patrons, that wouldn't be okay, right? So we can't have a few police that kill, and we can't have a few pilots who crash planes, right? So we have to make sure that we're eradicating that completely from policing at all. This is a place where you must have zero tolerance. It can't be there's a few. It's got to be zero. And I think that getting the police to understand that, there is certainly some recognition, like I said, for individuals to have an appreciation for what police officers do, because it's not easy. It's not easy. But I think that we need to recognize that, it's not okay. It is just not okay to kill Black and brown people. Sorry.
I feel like it's ridiculous sometimes when you have to explain that to people, because like you said, I also think there's no reason to justify why a police would kill. Like, well, he should have, stayed quiet when he was getting arrested, or he should have complied. Because like you said, using the same example as a pilot, if a pilot is crashing a plane, you're not going to say, well, there was that one passenger that wouldn't shut up or that kept walking around, right? That would sound ridiculous.
Oh my goodness. Yes, you nailed it.
But it's like the same argument, so I definitely agree with you. It's crazy that we still have to say these things, but they are uncomfortable conversations. And another question is, how does the Urban League create a space where like these difficult yet important conversations are being had? So I know you talked a little bit about talking to the police commissioner, but even when it comes to talking about it with communities that may not understand.
Yeah, and we do that a couple of different ways, and I think we can always do it better. But I think that we basically do that in a lot of ways through our young professionals. So I told you that the Urban League works with individuals who are recent college graduates who want to give back to their communities in some ways, and so they volunteer and they serve as mentors to our programming. The young people in our they also come together for networking, and they come together to talk about issues. And so one of the moments for me in my leadership journey was after Eric Gardner, the decision came down on his murder. And I was in my office, and one of the young professionals was talking to me about it, and I was listening, but I was doing some things on my desk. I was, trying to find some document for something that I needed to get done or whatever. And I was listening, but I was still, moving things around. And as I looked up and I looked into the face of my young professional, I realized he had tears in his eyes. And for him, that moment was the Rodney King moment for me and my generation, when we were literally just like, we cannot believe that this just happened, which for my mom's generation was the Emmett Till moment, when her generation could not believe what had happened. And unfortunately, I think that moment has to happen every single generation that wakes us up and makes us woke, how young people talk about it now, but that wakes us up and makes us realize that there's still more work to be done, a fight to be fought, and we all need to figure out what our role is in that struggle.
Yeah, I agree. And also realizing that whatever form of activism you can contribute is activism. Like, you may not be able to go to the front lines, but if you can donate to bail funds, or if you can post information, or I always say even educating a relative that normally would not get their education from anywhere outside of their own circle, if you can kind of burst that bubble and let them and speak to them in a language that maybe they understand about, you know, what the Black Lives Matter movement means, or what the defund the police movement really means. That's activism, and it's activism where it really matters, because it may not always be present in those kind of spaces.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Darleny, I love that. I love the idea of educating people in your own circle. I mean, that is where it has to start. It means having an uncomfortable conversation at Thanksgiving. It means not letting a joke slide that's a little off color. It means being able to see somebody in the grocery store and realize, wait a minute, that person was standing here before I was, and now you're ignoring that person and serving me, right? So it is from the smallest, and in the workplace as well too, that it's recognized, and coming to a leadership meeting and looking around the table and realizing, hey, wait a minute, there's only one woman here. Or wait a minute, there's no Black people here. There's no Latino people here. What's going on? And so I think that those are all ways in which to open your eyes, and then to become, the first thing is awareness. Then it is about education. People often tease and say when a horrible thing happens to a Black or brown person, white people start researching, right? And there's nothing wrong with reading, White Fragility and reading some of the other great books that are out there. That's fine. We want you to read it and be educated. But once you are educated, then you need to act. And you can act in really big ways, or you can act in having that conversation with the uncle who just needs to have a conversation.
Yeah, and we all have those family members, so I think it's understandable. And I think, it's a growth process for everybody. It's a growth process for this very young country, that's very impressionable compared to like other countries in the world, and can still be improved in so many ways. So it's a process. And I think sometimes even in that process, myself and a lot of my peers and just people that I encounter, it can feel frustrating. It can feel draining. It can feel exhausting. It can make you angry the way that Rodney King made you angry, or that Emmett Till may have made your mother angry. What advice do you have for either my generation or just people in general that are having these feelings, but, want to keep going in this fight and don't know how?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, it's such a great question. And I think that it's finding out what inspires you. Giving yourself an opportunity to renew and charge. So for me, I'm going to be in a good space for the rest of the week because you and I have had this conversation, right? It's because you inspire me. And so that's going to be something that I take with me. And I realize that there's this next generation that is talking about these issues, that's talking about racism and xenophobia and immigration and how this all comes together, and using terms like intersectionality. Like, I love that, right? So that's going to be something that's going to provide me with the energy that I need to get through to the next leg of the journey. Then it's also doing personal time as well. My spending time with my nieces and nephew, being able to spend time with my family. I love the botanical gardens, so being able to be around flowers, you have to renew yourself. And then the last thing for me is I'm very much am a historical person, as you could probably tell from this conversation. And so on those days that I get really, really, really tired, I think about Hazel Dukes, who's currently the head of the New York State NAACP, who's been a member of and working with the NAACP for over 50 years. And so those days when I get tired, I think, Hazel's still doing it, and she's in her 80s. And then I think about people like Harriet Tubman, who kept going back to get slaves, and says that she would have gotten more slaves if they had only known that they weren't free. And so I think about historically the burden that people have carried, and that I am my grandmother's wildest dream. And so I'm living and doing things as a result of the things that she couldn't do. And then I'm encouraged by individuals who I come in contact with right now. And then I also have to take that moment to just take a breath and literally smell the flowers.
Yeah, I definitely felt you on that. As somebody who always, promotes and advocates for self-care, and I myself have like self-care days that I call Darleny days. So I definitely think it's important sometimes, to take a pause, take a pause for yourself. But also, like you said, remember how far you've come, whether it's your family or whether it's yourself. I definitely felt you when you said you are your grandmother's wildest dreams, because that's something that I say to myself a lot, especially when I'm feeling stuck and down, because my grandmother was a Black woman in DR who, had to like literally pick rice in the farms and had to drop out at 3rd grade to do so. And then for me to even touch college, regardless of my age, it's progress. However it looks like, it's progress. So that definitely inspires me as well. Where do we go from here, Arva? How do we move forward with everything going on? How do we use all of the emotions and everything we talked about to move forward?
Yeah, I think it's important that we take as much advantage of this moment as possible. As I mentioned, we have had other crescendos. We have had other times where, people either marched, took to the streets, had policies, and made change. And I think that but this moment is unique. And the moment that was unique, particularly in New York State, was because we had individuals who were marching and saying that they were looking for police reform. And exactly at that time, we had a majority in the Senate, and we had a majority in the Assembly as well. We had the leader of the Senate, who was an African-American woman, Andrea Stewart Cousins. We had a leader in the Assembly, Carl Hasties, who was African-American. And so when we said to them that we wanted to push forward some police reform that had been literally sitting in people's drawers for years, that they could take advantage of that time in that moment. And so you had legislators who had already drawn up the legislation, literally dusted it off, and were able to present it. And then you had the majority able to put it in place. So I think we need to get ready, and we need to stay ready. I think that we need to consider running for office and contributing to people who are running for office. I think it's important for us to, yes, but we have to also mobilize, and we also have to listen to the voices of the young people, because they are the ones who are going to lead this revolution. They're going to make this change. And it is so important that we not only create the space, but we move over and pull up a chair in order that they can move into the next generation.
Yes, I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much, Arva. Thank you for this conversation. There are some questions coming in from the audience, so I'm just going to ask you some of those questions. What are your views on the defund the police movement? So we talked a little bit about it, but maybe you can talk more about your personal views on that, and how you think, if you think that's even possible in this day and age.
Sure. I think that there's different definitions of defund the police, right? And so I think that there's some that are on a different spectrum, right? So I think that the most quote unquote radical of defunding the police are some models that we have seen in other parts of the country, where they really believe that, and have shown statistics that a lot of the responses that police have are to 911 that are 911 calls that really are not having to do with real crimes. And so there's a whole grouping of people who say that the police's work really isn't as much in solving crimes as one would imagine. And so let's look at some alternatives so that we really, truly, and completely abolish the police as we know it. That we set up different teams of people who are responsible for conflict resolution, that we have individuals who patrol the streets and make sure that people feel safe to do them, that they really, truly, completely believe in defunding, abolishing police, and abolishing policing as it is currently structured. There's another grouping in a body of people that believe that the police have been engaged in a lot of things that are beyond just their given mandate. So if there's an issue that's happening, if there's noise that's happening at 3 o'clock in the morning, if there's homeless people that they can't move away from their street, if there is a dispute, but it's, it's a conflict, that the police are called, because they're people that are in place 24 hours a day. Who else can you call at 3 in the morning? Who else can you call? So there's a grouping of people who believe that the police have taken on these various roles that could be done other places. And so let's defund them, meaning let's take out a chunk of that money and have that be used and have it go to homeless services and they can handle that. Or let's have it go over here and have social workers be able to work on that. Let's set up a system where social workers aren't just working 9 to 5, but there's another shift that there's 3 different shifts of social workers that can be deployed and trained in resolution, that sort of thing. So those are folks who say defund the police, but they're meaning to take out a chunk of what they think that the police should not be doing. And then there's other people who believe in softer reforms, right? And so they think that the police, there should be more training. They believe that the police officers should have more positive interaction with young people. They believe that that the message and the work of places like the NYPD is not getting out, and so that the issue is around messaging and knowledge and that sort of thing. So they have a little bit of a lighter touch on it, and I think that that's the full spectrum. Not surprisingly, a place like the Urban League, we're in the center, right? So we think that there's a lot of things that police have been asked to do that we don't think that they should do. So we think that there should be some defunding of the police, because we think that their mandate has wandered into some areas that's not specifically their expertise. So that's kind of the place and space in which we live, with with respect for people on either end of the spectrum.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it is. I think it's a big spectrum, and I think, like you said, defund the police can sound so vague, especially when people don't look at the reallocation aspect of that statement. Like you said, reallocating for mental health professionals, for social services. I also think it's about, like, for me personally, it's about policies. It's about accountability and transparency. There shouldn't be, if there are quote unquote bad apples in the police department, just like the bad apples that are maybe in the pilot industry, they'd get charged for, like, if they kill any passenger, let alone like a whole plane. So if police are constantly being acquitted for killing innocent human beings, that's an issue. That's a policy issue that needs to be solved. There should be no immunity for those kind of bad apples. I also think that there should be, like, policy change when it comes to, the consequences that people have. If you call the police on a Black person because you feel like, there should be consequences. You know what I mean? There should be something that stops from practicing this kind of abuse of power. So I do agree with that. I think I am just like the Urban League in the center, but I think it really is about, like, what does that defunding look like? It doesn't just look like, let's take $1 billion and put it into school safety, because in a way that's just policing schools versus policing the neighborhood, And when you look at the school to prison pipeline, school safety plays a big role in that. So it's like, really, how do you solve, like, these systemic issues at their core?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned school safety, because that's another one. Yeah. But so having police in schools, is that anything anybody wants? So there's a better way to deal with that? Are there ways to work with school student leaders and have them be responsible for really, setting rules and enforcing them in their own building? And we've seen some models where that's been really successful. And I think that I would push for investing more in that rather than having the police presence in the schools.
Oh, I totally agree. Totally agree. And just speaking of education, one of our viewers did ask, how does the Urban League collaborate with higher ed institutions? And if so, in what way does that collaboration occur?
Yeah, we do definitely work with higher education. One example that we did was a few years ago, we partnered with CUNY and it was actually CUNY and U.S. News and World Reports, and created something called A Parent's Guide to College, and then followed it with A Parent's Guide to STEM. And so we were able to create this booklet that we gave out throughout the city. We did accompanying set of workshops with them. And then every year, which is actually coming up in November, we do a historically Black college and university fair. And at our HBCU fair, we have schools from historically Black colleges and universities in the South come and do recruitment. And we also make sure that CUNY and SUNY are involved in that work, in that conference as well, because we recognize that so many of our students go to CUNY and SUNY. And so we partner with them in that way. And at our historically Black college and university fair, we had, last year was the biggest fair that we've had in a number of years. Usually we have, we do have thousands of kids there, but last year we had over 5,000 kids. And they were able to find out directly about the college experience. Some of them were accepted on site. Some of them received college admissions waivers. Some of them received scholarships. And so it's just an amazing day. And we do that fair on an annual basis and try to make sure that we stay connected both to those HBCUs as well as to CUNY. But that's some of the ways in which we work with the higher education community.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear. I think, especially in communities like mine in the Bronx, I think a lot of students don't realize the future that can exist for them outside of maybe their borough or the environment that they've grown up knowing, especially when like HBCUs or even CUNY, depending on which CUNY you go, based on your interests. I think a lot of people don't give themselves the chance, or their parents may not know that these opportunities exist. Having a guide like that for them would be amazing. For that. And what other programs that the Urban League champions? What other programs does the Urban League champion that maybe you haven't spoken of yet? And can you be more specific on how they support these programs?
Sure, absolutely. And I realized I forgot to say this, and I think it's important because you and I share this in common, is that one of the reasons why we developed that parent guide is when my older brother went to college, we all got into the van and we drove from Milwaukee, Wisconsin to a place called Cedarville, Ohio. And so when we got out of the van and stepped onto that college campus, it was pretty amazing for us because, us as all the younger kids were like, wow, we've never been on a college campus before. This is so cool. Well, for my parents, they'd never been on a college campus either. Yeah. So it was a new experience for our entire family. And so as for those of us who are, the first generation to go to school, who are living our grandmother's dreams, right? It's important for us to have the supports that we need in order to be successful, so we were talking a little bit about what is some of the other things that the Urban League does. And so one of the things another thing that I really enjoy specifically about our education program is that we have scholars. And so they're called Whitney M. Young Scholars. In the Urban League movement, Whitney M. Young was a president of our National Urban League, and he unfortunately died in a drowning accident off of the coast of in Africa when he was visiting there. And so as a result of the incredible work that he did leading the Urban League movement, and then also all around the country, you'll have something that's named for Whitney M. Young in his memory. One of the things that I learned about him is that when he passed away, it was when President Ford was president at that time, who you may remember is a Republican president. And he was so moved by finding out that Whitney M. Young had died that he actually sent Air Force Two to go pick up his body. Well, I never even knew there was such a thing as Air Force Two, but that who was sent to go pick up Gerald Ford sent him to pick up Whitney M. Young's body. But the Whitney M. Young Scholars are scholarships that we give every year. Over the course of the Urban League's history, we've given out over $20 million in scholarships to 4,000 young people. And we not only give them a scholarship, but we pair them with one of our young professionals. And so they have a mentor that they are usually connected with, not only for those 4 years of school, but they often stay with them even afterwards. And so it's a unique opportunity because we're the Urban League, that for a person who for many of them, it's going to be their first person in their family to go to school, maybe their older brother or sister, but they don't have generations of people who went to college. And so they're paired with somebody who looks like them, who may have had a very similar experience that can help to walk them through that process. And so I think that that's something else that I'm really proud of in terms of the Urban League's programming and work, is providing that support for often first-time college students to not only go to school to get the scholarship check, but also to get the support and to build a community in order for them to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's definitely important for first-gen students, how you said, because I think a lot of people think, especially myself when I graduated high school, that it's just academically that college can be challenging, but really it's emotionally, it's mentally, it's spiritually, it's through it. And if you don't feel like you have the way that multi-generational families that have been through college have, you're more likely to want to, you know, take a break, drop out even, or give up on yourself when you haven't even seen like what your potential can do, you know?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I remember going to school, and I went to a, fairly competitive school, and I got there, and, everybody, the definition of me was I was the smart girl. Right. And then I got to this college and everybody was the smart kid. Right. And I just remember one of my professors telling me that, how did you get into this school? And having to carry that message, that negative message with me, and just really trying to fight and to be able to push through and to continue. And I did, and was able to rebound, but those messages are tough.
Really are. And sometimes it's hard even when you deal with microaggressions like that, but even when you yourself deal with like that imposter syndrome of like, what am I doing here? Like, are they sure they got my name right? And it's hard. It's really difficult because you have to kind of learn about yourself. And I think for me, and we spoke a little bit about it backstage, but for those who may not know, I had to take a break from school, and my education journey has been in waves, like I'm literally about to graduate community college just now, but I graduated high school in 2015. And there were times that I swore that I failed, and I didn't know what I failed at, but I just knew I failed because I wasn't graduating in 4 years, and I wasn't what I consider was like the college student, like the ideal college student. I wasn't doing things in a linear way, but like we talked about earlier, it's about the journey. It's not about the race.
No, it is absolutely and completely about the journey. And one thing, whenever I speak to young people, is that I want them to know is that, obviously everybody says that everybody fails, and, we learn, and I don't ever fail. I just grow. Well, the fact is that, when you miss the mark, it hurts. Right. And it is singular, and it is painful, and you feel like you're the only one going through it. But I do want people to know that there is not a single person that you admire that has not cried themselves to sleep at night.
Yeah.
So that is just a reality. And so it's the moment will come and the tears will fall, but we get to the other side. We're stronger, we're better people because of it. And there's the people that we admire have gone through it too.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's what really makes a glory story worth, watching and really admiring. And I think it's also what makes people like you and people who run like the New York Urban League, or in Goddard Riverside's case, the Option Center and the Success and the Access and Success Program, it's coming from these experiences and saying like, we don't want this future generation to go through that, or we want to provide as many resources as possible. Personally, I have to give testimony. If it was not for Options Access, I would not have gone into college. And if it wasn't for the Option Success Program, I would not be in college. So I owe a lot to programs like that. And can you just talk a little bit more about how those kinds of programs are necessary to combat systemic racism?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you had an opportunity to thank the folks at Goddard Riverside for the ways in which they have supported you. Nobody gets through these journeys by themselves. There's always people that have to be there to support you. And you mentioned that, we create these programs so that individuals won't have to go through these trials. And the fact is that yes, but we always know that some version of it's going to happen, right? So your microaggression didn't look the same as my microaggression, but it's unfortunately it's still going to happen. As I mentioned, we had a vice president of the United States, look at America and say that he didn't believe that systemic racism existed in this country. Right. I did not think I would hear those sentences after we had President Barack Obama. But the fact is that we're in a moment where I feel like we've clearly stepped back a little bit in our journey. And so it is so important for us to live in community. It is so important for us to find our tribe. And so in working in with community-based organizations, it often helps us to build a community. It helps us to build a tribe. You have friends that you've met from working with options that will probably be friends with you for life. And it is important for us to build that. And so that's why it's important to support organizations like this one, and for us to be involved and engaged as much as possible. My mom always says that if you are successful enough to break through a door and to become the first in your industry, or to be really successful, that it is your obligation to keep that door open and to make sure that it is open for the next generation, and it's open for those who are younger than you are in order to step through.
Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like there's no point of breaking the ceiling if you can't make sure that people can come after you and can do bigger things than you. So Whitney Young's daughter is one of the judges on the Goddard Social Justice Book Prize.
I didn't know that. That's fabulous.
Yeah, so who are the Black authors you read for inspiration?
Oh, that's a good one. Who are the Black authors that I read for inspiration? I love Gloria Naylor. I love her for her inspirational work. I love Toni Morrison. The first couple of pages of her books are always a little challenging for me. I'm like, am I really? I don't know if I feel it. And the next thing you know, I'm at the last page, sad that it's over. that I'm sorry that this journey that I feel like I've gone on is coming to a close. Those are two of my absolute favorites that when I think about authors. But I love books. My sister is an English teacher, and so she's always leaving books around for me, and I just love to be able to read stories. I'm looking forward to reading Caste. I read The Warmth of Other Suns, and that was definitely one of my favorites, which, as you may know, is the story of the Great Migration. And so I love that book. That was one of my favorites as well. And so Caste is on my short list to read next.
Yeah, I think books have definitely gotten me through all the craziness that's going on. So I can imagine they've been that support system for you as well. Particularly for me, it's been Assata Shakur's Autobiography, which funny enough, I would always pick up and never really throughout my ages, I never understood it. And then suddenly it was like a page turner. Like suddenly I'm like, this was written in the 70s, but it has everything to do with what's happening today. So I think in a way it can be refreshing. And like you said earlier in our conversation, going through that history kind of empowers you of like, okay, this is a movement that's continuous, and it's continuous through us and through future generations that are growing up even now and learning about the Black Lives Matter movement as it happens.
Absolutely. Coretta Scott King once famously said that freedom is won in every generation. And so it's fought and won in every generation. And I do believe that that's our challenge.
Yeah. And a privilege for me too, just to be able to experience it. It seems like Americans are always looking for a quick fix to make our schools better, whether it's uniform or testing. How do we really get people to value education and what it contributes to the social and economic mobility, especially of the Black and Brown community?
I have the textbook sort of professional answer to that, and then I have the Arva who lives in Harlem sort of response to that.
Give me the after hours Harlem Arva answer.
So I think that this moment in time, as you mentioned, and that so many of the inequalities that are present in our communities and our societies have been really brought to light through COVID. And so the things with the technology divide, access to resources, access to quality education, quality teachers, all those issues have been exacerbated during COVID. So at the same time, those issues have come to light also as there's the opportunity. I think that the way that we have been teaching children has fundamentally not changed in 50, maybe 100 years. We're still sitting in classrooms with desks all facing the same way, looking at one teacher. And so with the ways in which we've had to change education with with virtual learning, we need to look at that as an opportunity and to figure out how do we open the walls of schools and give young people an opportunity to learn in cultural institutions and businesses. This is an unprecedented time. It's an unprecedented challenge. And so we need to address it in unprecedented ways. When I think about what the impact of the public school system is, you know, when I go to the grocery store, and so I'm at the grocery store and there is a person who is trying to work with me, and I can tell sometimes that their skill sets, they have not been trained in the way that they deserved. Like they were not taught in the ways in which they should have been deserved, that they deserved graduating from their public school. And we failed them. We failed them. You know, we didn't provide basic training such that they can work the cash register in a way in which they can be successful. And so we have to take responsibility for that. We have to do better. We have to be better. And I think that this moment in time gives us an opportunity to do the work of education in a better way.
Well, I totally agree with everything you said. And I think, again, going back to the silver linings of this pandemic, it's made teachers and the Department of Education realize it wasn't working. Like just worrying about students passing tests and then graduating them, that wasn't working for what really was. Sorry, I live in the Bronx, so you know it gets so loud after hours.
No problem. Sounds of the city. It's all good.
Right, music to my ears. But yeah, those things weren't working. Worrying about students just passing a test or getting a GPA for being obedient, that wasn't really helping them, like you said, get the skills that they need. And even in terms of the inequities, it's like, to what extent are we really helping these students with these inequities? So like in Degrees NYC, we're creating a policy agenda where one of our priorities is making sure that students have access to the educational needs that they have, like digital access. And by that, it's not just about, oh, let me just give these kids any raggedy old computer so they can say they have a device. It's about them really having a device that helps them. If they need to do Zoom, they can't just get a Chromebook. They need something with higher processing power. If they're doing computer science in college, are you just giving them an iPad? You know what I mean? So like, to what extent are we really investing in these resources? And then also, I'm a sister of a little brother with autism. So for me, as you know, like I said, my family is an immigrant family, but we're also, as you can see, Black. Like we're Dominican, but we're Black, you know, typically. And this pandemic has definitely showed the levels of inequities, especially when it comes to disabled children of color, where like in this pandemic, they've kind of taken like a back seat for the resources they need and everything. And I think this had to happen for people to really go back to the drawing board and be like, okay, this wasn't working. It was just barely enough. We were just conforming to what was normal, but it was an outdated system, and it doesn't really help students thrive. And, you know, it's about making learning fun again. Like, there's nothing wrong with learning being fun. But I remember in high school, it was like a crime to make learning fun, because it was like, no, we have to worry about this test, you know? So I think it's a chance to really just break the rules, because there are no rules right now. So create rules, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. And there are some teachers, some individual principals that are doing that. You know, I'm good friends with the founder of Eagle Academy, and you know they're trying to provide opportunities for their boys to learn by, you know, working in businesses, working in cultural institutions, as I mentioned, being able to interact as much as possible with male role models, and so trying to break open those school doors, because I think this is the opportunity to do that, and I think it's very important because, you know, people like your little brother, we want to make sure that they have as much opportunities and the supports that they need to be successful.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think whether it's students like my little brother or just, you know, other you know, college girls' little brother who are going through that education system right now, you want to make sure that they have great mentorship, but you also want to make sure that their schools are supporting them in the way that they need to, and that their schools are providing them opportunities outside of just get a degree and then good luck out there, you know?
Yeah, and really focus on testing and not about learning, right? So we don't want to create good testers. We want us to create good learners, particularly since we know that the place and space where there's the biggest growth in industry is in science, technology, engineering, and math. And in that area, we really need to have little engineers, people who are problem solvers, who can think outside of the box, who may, I know it's scandalous, but may not always need a 4-year degree, but do need to have those problem solving skills. And filling in bubbles is not going to help you when it comes to learning how to really problem solve.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not. And it's about really aligning them to their career interests, to, you know, to really have that social and economic mobility, because I genuinely believe that that's the best way that we're really going to help our community thrive economically, and also get seats at these tables that we've historically been kept out of, and the rooms that we've historically been kept out of. Somebody asked a very interesting question. Let me just make sure I can go back to it. How do you remain open to and respectful of different viewpoints when the fundamental difference is a belief in the humanity and rights of others? It's a deep question.
I know, right? Read that one more time.
Let me just hit you with that one more time. How do you remain open to and respectful of different viewpoints when the fundamental difference is a belief in the humanity and rights of others?
Ooh. Yeah, that's a really hard one. Yeah, it really is. I recently had an opportunity. I mentioned to you that we're releasing this report called The State of Black New York. The national organization, our National Urban League, started releasing this report when Vernon Jordan was the CEO over 40 years ago. And at that time, it was groundbreaking, to talk about how Black people were doing. Folks had no idea. They barely interacted with a Black person in a week, let alone on a daily basis. And so when the statistics started to come out, it was like, earth shattering. And so now, when we put together the report, some of the statistics still are daunting and surprising to some people. And so we haven't done the State of Black New York in a number of years. And so it will release next month. And so we did a preview conversation with one of our partner organizations that is not of the same race as the Urban League. And it was challenging because it was an intergenerational conversation. And it was challenging because the young people who were Black, who were of the younger group, and the white, who were of the younger group, had very similar responses to the information. Thought that the statistics were not good. The fact that of the number of young people that are incarcerated in New York City, even though we don't have as robust of a stop and frisk policy, the difference in high school completion rates between white and Black students was something that was appalling. But it wasn't. These were statistics that were not as much news to the younger generation as it was to the older generation. And it was challenging at various times, both for me and my conversation, and then for others who were having similar conversations in their Zoom rooms, right? And so kind of looking at attitudes that we sometimes think will, somebody's grandmother thinks that way or grandfather thinks that way. We're not going to hear that now. And having to hear it in real time is challenging. And I often have to step back and take a breath and then realize that I have to be courageous. And so if there is something that is being said that is inaccurate, that is slanderous of a group of people, that speaks down on a group of people, that I need to speak out at that moment. And I'll give one last example of that. This was a person who was also involved in the Urban League, very active with us, good person, good heart, but just had a lot of issues with Reverend Al Sharpton. I understand that for some people, he's not their cup of tea. But he said, I just don't understand it. I don't understand this love that Black people have for Reverend Al Sharpton. And I said, I understand that for some people that they feel like, going back to some of the things in his past or what have you, that they have issues. I said, but you need to understand that African Americans had Al Sharpton before we had smartphones. So he represented what people didn't believe happened to us because we didn't have a phone to show you then. So you can disagree or not agree, but that's what the role that he played, and it was a very important one. And so in that moment, having to have that conversation with him, I had to take a breath. Okay, don't want to come across as the angry Black woman having this conversation, but it was important for me to step up and stand up and say, you know, it's okay. We may disagree when we walk away from here as well, but you know, you're challenging something that is a fundamental belief of mine. And so when somebody's challenging a fundamental belief, you need to be able to step out, and speak up, and be able to articulate why you think differently.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's a hard thing to do, like you said, when you have to step back and kind of like defend what you believe, but do so in a way where you're not taking it personally and you're really trying to kind of let the person know where you're coming from. Like how you said, Al Sharpton was here before smartphones were here. So to kind of make them understand that significance. And I've had similar moments too where my mom always says, like, you might be the only Bible somebody ever reads. Like, you might be the only time that the only experience somebody has of something. And for me, a lot of it has been both explaining Black Lives Matter movement to my Dominican family and my Dominican community, and having a lot of patience with that and speaking to them in a way that they understand, and really understanding that even when they say certain things, they don't have bad intentions, but they're just misinformed. And then vice versa, when I've had to explain, you know, immigration and the basic rights of immigrants to, you know, people that are xenophobes. And believe it or not, it's not just white MAGA wearing, you know, Trump supporters that are xenophobic. Like, I've met a lot of Democratic people that are like, look, I'm just saying, what's the point of coming here if you're going to come illegally? And I noticed that, you know, there's a stigma between, you know, of like what the immigrant is, the freeloader, the one that can't speak English. And I've had people say to me, because I'm an immigrant, like, but immigrants like you, I'm fine with. It's just those kind of immigrants. And I've had to, you know, say, like, I come from those immigrants. I would not be here without that, because that immigrant is my mother. You know, that immigrant is my father. That immigrant is my maternal grandmother. I mean, my paternal grandmother. So kind of painting that picture for them and trying to always meet people in the middle where maybe you don't agree with me today, but at least you can understand my perspective. At least maybe you learned something from this conversation. We both did, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't say any better. Yes.
So Arva, as you know, like we talked about, we are going through a very challenging time in our nation. What gives you hope? What gives you hope moving forward?
Wow, what gives me hope is being able to not only see Kamala Harris hold herself in with such wonderful grace and dignity, and to be able to so intelligently have the debate that she had last night, but also to know that she was able to do that because of the work that Hillary Clinton did. And Hillary Clinton wasn't able to break the glass ceiling, but she bumped against it so hard that she created a whole bunch of tiny little cracks. And I think it's those tiny little cracks that are providing an opportunity for Kamala to come along behind her. And I think that it's moments like that that give me hope. It's moments like that when I'm listening to the debate afterwards and people are talking about how, well, she could have said that or shouldn't have said that, or maybe said that because of, you know, the stereotypes of the angry Black woman, or because of, you know, women are perceived in one way whereas men aren't necessarily perceived in that way. And I know that when I first started to watch the news, you didn't even have conversations about that. Like you didn't hear the fact that, you know, women are treated differently than men. What? Or that, you know, the needs or the issues of African-American women. Are you kidding me? So the fact that that was just really in the central and part of central conversation, that gives me hope. That makes me think that it's going to be different for my nieces, that they're going to be able to, that ceiling that has all the cracks in it is now going to, you know, eventually be through, and the sky's the limit for what it is that they're going to be able to do and be. And that makes me hopeful.
Yeah. Thank you. That actually touched my heart too. So, because I think about, I call them my nieces because my cousin has kids. My sister doesn't yet, but, you know, when I think of like that next generation, my family, that's my hope for them as well, you know, and I think that's something that we can all share as a country, regardless of what your background comes from. We want a better life for a better life for our next generations, but also a more equitable life, a more equitable sorry. I think it was. Hello?
Go, we can hear you now, Darleny. I'm glad you waited until the end to cut out. Perfect timing.
Yes.
I just really want to thank both of you for this incredible and dynamic discussion. I mean, it was so powerful to hear from both of you. I think it was just incredible. Yeah, what the heck? Thank you. Thank you. We really appreciate it. I want to thank everyone in the audience who joined us this evening, and I hope you'll join us again next Thursday when we have another great round of conversations with Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer and Goddard Riverside's own Executive Director, Rod Jones. Thank you again and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think we're backstage.